OODAcast, informing your decisions with intelligence, analysis, and insight. Brought to you by the team at OODAloop.com.
Hello, I'm Bob Gorley, the CTO of OODA LLC, and today on the OODAcast, Bill Hagestad. Bill, welcome.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And one thing I want to mention right at the top is you just finished speaking at OODAcon and engaging with us at OODAcon, and really appreciated having you there. The entire community was just really saw your presentation as insightful and beneficial and actionable. So thanks for that.
You're very welcome. I should mention that that is a one-of-a-kind presentation for the Unicon folks, and I have not distributed other than to a couple of folks under very close conditions. So please, share that with, and I know you had mentioned you have a recording of it, but, happy to contribute to the community and with that one-off research and definitely happy to provide any information that can help us, most
Great.
definitely.
Well, let's get into some things that we didn't really have time to discuss during OODAcon, if you don't mind. Like, Bill would love it if you'd start out with a bit of your foundational story and start early. How did you get into this domain of studying the PRC?
Well, it goes back to my opening soliloquy in Mandarin during Udacan. Actually, I talked about how I had to apply to headquarters Marine Corps to get off the active roles while I studied in China. And I think I had mentioned in English, this gunnery sergeant calls me up and he's like, Hagestad, what are you doing? Are you turning red communist Chinese on us? And I'm like, no, Gunny, I think we should study our adversaries. And he's like, well, Commandant Marine Corps has authorized you to go off the active roles while you go study in China. So go, and then when you come back, we're going to want to talk to you when you're done. So, that was back in 1983. And honestly, I never used my Mandarin or my love of studying China in the Marine Corps. That would make too much sense. In fact, my defense language aptitude barrier tests were so high because of that experience that I tested out of being able to go to Monterey. But nonetheless, what happened as I retired on 1 July 2011, I got a contract to write a book. And the book was based on how would China use computers as a weapon system. And that was the launch of 21st century Chinese cyber warfare, which was a second career, which still continues today. Obviously, Udacan is a step on that journey.
Yeah.
And so I did not choose it, Bob. It chose me.
You know, you're a man of integrity in all things, but I wonder what if you may have been tempted to do worse on that test, so you would have had to go to Monterey. Uh, and beautiful place and a great school.
Yes, sir. Well, and having served our country as well, when you're given a test, whether it's physical or mental, you always want to do better than anyone else. So you give it your best shot. So you're right. Integrity being the better part of valor. I did my best.
Cool. I want to talk about all your books, including that one. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit more about your career arc? Like in the Marine Corps, were you an artillery officer?
No, I was an artilleryman. Man, sorry. We were affectionately called ourselves gun bunnies back in those days on the old 175 self-propelled 100-pound shells, working the system. I was actually promoted to working on sighting the gun line with theodotic survey equipment, which required algebra, which I was poor at, but there was a giant manual that the U.S. Army had put out. So I knew I could find the right arcs for that, speaking of arcs for the artillery shells in that book, which then sent me to embarkation school. So all of the planes that the Air Force has, all the ships that the Navy has, and the Army, I know how to load those as an embarkation chief. Went on to the basic school. Because of my background in logistics, they needed logistics officers. So I started out my career as a forward deployed lieutenant to the Philippines during it was before the eruption of Mount Pinatubo, but communist guerrillas, the NPA, were actually giving the government a hard time. So they sent us forward. I don't know if you remember the earthquake that trashed the Marriott in Baguio City. but we were there for recovery efforts. And from there, kicking and screaming, I was picked to be a general's aide. Uh, a funny story, I told the general I don't want the job, and he said that's exactly what I'm going to get it, give it. So, and then I became the intelligence officer for 3rd Maintenance Battalion and had just a wonderful time there. And then came back to the U.S., uh, transitioned into the Military Police Corps, and worked my way through the ranks all the way up to company commander, prepping Marines for the second Gulf War, or Operation Iraqi Freedom. Um, and from there, as you know, with field grade officers, they don't really know what to do with us. So I was sent to Marine Forces Pacific, and they said, since you're an MP with anti-terrorism force protection, we're going to send you forward. So my career has always been one of going forward ahead of everybody. It's sort of a metaphor what you're asking me questions about. And I retired out of Marine Forces Pacific as a lieutenant colonel.
Cool, great. And I know that experience is had a bearing on you. Every Marine I've ever worked with is a sharp, professional, forward thinker, and I see that reflected in your writing, in your presentation, and discussions. So thanks for going through that.
Thank you, sir.
Now, speaking of your writing,
Absolutely. I do it as a
well, speaking of your writing, the way I find you is via your website, and I'm going to have links to that here. And you have a lot of books too. But how can people track you when they want to capture your reading? Is the website the best way?
website is one way. I think much the way that I found my original topic was to just Google it. I'm on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon, so that makes it pretty easy to find the ideas. They can either search my last name plus author or Hagestad plus China. Um, and mentioned, the use of GPT. Apparently, there's quite an entry on me. It's several columns long. But the website is a good way to do it. But LinkedIn, I have a very prolific profile there, and then certainly on X as well.
Cool. Yeah, I was doing some of that before the call here, and pulled up your Amazon profile and the books that are linked there. And I have links in the show notes to all this. Can I ask you about some of the books that I see here in Amazon?
Yes, sir, please.
You already mentioned one, 21st Century Chinese Cognitive Warfare. Can you give
Yes.
us a feel for what that gets into?
Oh, absolutely, sir. So this really talks about it's the primer for dissipative warfare, wherein the use of psychological operations, the use of civilian militias that are predisposed at targeting a particular population. Think of the Taiwanese, for example, in terms of convincing them of an idea that their political, their economic, their military stability is under challenge, not from the obvious adversary, in this case, the People's Republic of China, but from someone who would want to destabilize them. And if for China watchers or anybody that's been in the Far East, it's not hard to figure out how one would use that. But it is the early forms come to life of psychological warfare, which is talked about by the two gentlemen who sandwiched me in my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, and those were the authors of Unrestricted Warfare.
Yes, sir. Lieutenant General Qiao Liang and Senior Colonel Wang Xiaoshui. Yes,
Oh. And then another book I see here, it seems to build on this first one, the 21st Century Chinese Militarization of Artificial Intelligence.
absolutely. Yes, yes. This
You know,
is a quite a way to work. And again, in both cases, Bob, in all cases of the books that I've written, I looked to see if there was any work out there. And you're an author. I've got your book right here, by the way. You know that you don't write a book to make money. You write a book to get an idea out there because it's not there so that others may learn and enjoy, your passion for it. And, Chinese militarization of artificial intelligence was another example. It didn't exist. And I took the time to research how, where, the real mechanization and mobilization of Chinese artificial intelligence large language models are being used not only by society as part of the revolutionary military affairs, in this latest of theirs, but really how their military is used to their advantage, from destroying a observe, orient, decide, act loop, as we talked about in Udakan, to really being able to be at a place and time during hostilities with another country and defeat them before they realize what's happening.
Yeah. And, this is a topic that we've written about a bit at OODAloop.com. And then when I wrote my book, Dragon Falls, the whole point of me writing this fiction was to have something entertaining and fun for folks who want to read an espionage thriller. But I also wanted to examine what this kind of algorithmic warfare may look like when it comes to espionage. And the scenarios that I wrote about, I wanted to write about because they're important to think through. And just yesterday, I see the AI company Anthropic released a report that their intelligence team pulled together, which is the first reported example of Chinese espionage using AI agents, agentic AI. What they did was they used Anthropic's Claude platform and created agents, assigned each of them different tasks, like you go look for vulnerable places, you look for their vulnerabilities, and this one here, you go look for exploits that will match those vulnerabilities, and this one over here, you create a campaign that we can exploit. And they used agentic AI to automate these things, right? A scenario out of my fiction or a scenario out of your nonfiction.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. And
yes, sir. Fooling an AI LLM, uh, hosting the guardrails. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah. And another thing I noticed, then Anthropic did not underscore this enough, I think. They were able to see what was happening after the fact, and they said the attacks were less successful because these agents were hallucinating. And a lot of these AIs will hallucinate if you don't architect them right. So these AI agents were coming up with bad conclusions, and so the many of the attacks were not successful. The point I thought of as an intel officer is, well, this is a thinking, creating, creative adversary who's going to learn from those mistakes and keep improving. And
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes, especially now that it has those TTPs, techniques, tactics, and procedures from an adversarial cyber perspective in its collective mindset. Most definitely, you are right.
let me ask about another book on your site, your Amazon page, Chinese Information Warfare Doctrine Development. And this was from 1994 to 2014. Well, I guess the obvious question is, why study something so old?
Well, at the time that I wrote it, I was looking, again, are there any doctrinal publications that explain the evolution of cyber warfare? And at the time, cyber was becoming a transmogrification of information assurance, information warfare, information security. So I just put a pin in it and said, let's call it information warfare for what it is. And I really took a look at a number hundreds of military doctrinal discussions and curated those into a year by year book for folks to study. I understand that the Marine Corps University uses it within their studies. I'm sure there's other academic institutions that, but it's out there just as a placeholder to look, gather some names of military personalities outside of the purges that are taking place in China's military. But those are the up and coming thinkers when it comes to informatization and intelligentization, the future forms of warfare for China.
Yeah. And now, why did you start at 1994?
That's as far back as I dare take it. At the time, now in my research, I've uncovered very old websites that go back to 83. So it's interesting. And that was just the window that I picked. I think I wrote it in 2014, so I figured I'll just go back 10 years. Yeah.
I noticed in the book there's a section you reference Andy Marshall, the famous founder and leader for most of its time, the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon. and a great thinker and a great red teamer. So it was good seeing him
Yes,
mentioned in your book.
yes, yes.
Then you wrote another on, you called it Operation Middle Kingdom, and that was more focused on computers and networks as a
Yes.
weapon system.
Yes, sir. And that book was I had to take it off the market for a little bit because it was a little bit too close to some organizations' parameters. I had to re-release it. But indeed, it was supposed to be a second edition of 21st Century Chinese Cyber Warfare, and it turned out to be something much different because at the time I was heavily involved in going into Asia on a regular basis. Not so much China. I mean, that did come a little bit later, but many of the countries around there, Taiwan, Brunei, Hong Kong to a lesser degree, Singapore, Japan, and obviously, as I just mentioned, Taiwan. So it was interesting to see how other countries' hackers were supporting some of these state-sponsored hackers. And at the time, they were not really known as being sponsored by the People's Republic of China, the state entity. So this was sort of one of those, I won't say groundbreaking, but it kind of opened the door into, yeah, these guys are out there and I've met them.
Yeah. Um, Bill, we had heard you for a long time. You're so highly regarded in the community and been reading you forever. But Matt DeVoe was thinking of you because he saw you at Black Hat in presentations you were doing to a large group of mostly CISOs, computer and security professionals, other security officers. A very well done presentation that was aimed at people who need to know more. And I wanted to mention that as a segue into a discussion of business and what businesses should know about the PRC. Maybe the way I should ask this is there are many in the business community who want to know more. How can they tap into you and your background? For example, do you do briefings for boards? Do you do training for corporations, tabletop exercises?
Yes, sir. Yes to all of the above. And typically, when I have done and do these for either Global 50s or Fortune 1000s, when they engage me, they'll say, well, we want to give you as much information. I'm like, no, don't give me anything. And And 100% of the time, I introduce them to facts about their business dealings with the Chinese that they had no possible idea were going ongoing in terms of their corporate interests. So it turns out to be very mutually beneficial. And then those will morph into, as you alluded to, tabletop exercises, where we take a specific part of their product set, for example, and then introduce into the tabletop exercise so that the organization can learn from compromises to systems. And it's not all about the engineering, that's a large part of it. But how compromised is an organization before they realize they need to do something about it?
Fascinating. Yeah, and so any company that
It's
wants to
fun.
reach out to you, they can, you just right on your website, you have your email address and contact info. So, right,
Yes, sir, absolutely.
right. Well, can you give us some insights broadly? I know this is a hard question, but let me just say for
Uh-huh.
a business leader in a Fortune 50, what kind of things should they know about doing business with China and seeking opportunities for business in China?
Yes, while at first blush it may seem an insurmountable answer, the answer is fundamentally quite easy, is looking at it through the lens of the Chinese. Number one, why do you as a foreigner want to do business in China? What is the benefit of your product and service? And are you willing to follow the rules of the road of the Chinese government? Which is not very difficult. And I've mentioned these five in other presentations that you should never do. The five items that foreign companies or foreign personnel that go to China should watch out for are obviously not engaging in any sort of pornography, specifically child pornography. Religions definitely should not engage or even talk about those things. Nothing that is negative or disgraceful towards the Chinese people. Certainly not any sort of disparaging comments against the Chinese culture. And most importantly, nothing that is negative or disparaging about the current president of China. Just do not go there. That's a no-fly zone for sure. I think of IBM and their relationship with Larkspur, for example. It's a well-known fact now these days, but it wasn't at the time, that Chinese companies require any foreign entity to use, if they come into China, foreign hardware, software, firmware within the computer systems so that we as foreigners don't introduce vulnerabilities into the Chinese infrastructure. If you can follow simple rules like that, as IBM did, IBM now builds all of the computers for the Chinese financial industry, period. I mean, that's a substantial market cap that will never be eroded by another Western company because they got it. And there are many other examples like that as well. I think Apple comes to mind, for example, a variety of other ones. There are some foibles along the way, and I think of, I drive a Jeep and I think highly of Chrysler Daimler, but their initial forays, not Chrysler Daimler, but Dodge in general, were filled with pitfalls that they did not adapt, which resulted in intellectual property theft and a missed opportunity. So, guidance and careful stepping are the methods that any corporate general or leader should be aware of.
No, let me ask a kind of a related question. There's a lot right now who talk of decoupling or restructuring or friendshoring or reshoring. And it's easy to say and very hard to do for these complex supply chains. For those that want to find other sources of supply other than China or that reduces China's influence over the supply chain, do you have any advice there or an ability to help companies that need work in that area?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my enjoyment passion projects is helping companies understand the alternatives to what is seen as a nascently developed and perhaps overly scarce resource is, friendshoring or offshoring. Where do you go when the Chinese don't want to do business with you anymore? And certainly that is uh, not an easy task, but it's also one that is is achievable if the right resources are put in mind. Fortunately, they otherwise know about.
Right. Well, Bill, let's segue now into some views on the PRC, if you don't mind. We do a lot of research and reporting and writing and tracking the day to day and trying to assess what comes next and scenarios of the future. But I would love any insights you can give us, if you don't mind. What comes next with the PRC? What should we be watching for?
Yes, well, I would say, sir, that it isn't so much what happens next, but are we watching the right things today? And I say that with very careful word choice. Uh, 2015, when that LinkedIn photo was taken, I was introduced to the One Belt, One Road concept. I remember coming back and talking to friends, around the Washington area, and none of them had heard of it. And they said, "Bill, you're crazy. China would never build a maritime Belt Road initiative." And I'm like, "Well, they are, and they have, and they're already started." And then I asked them, I said, "So what is at Yokosuka?" Uh, it's the seventh fleet for the U.S. Navy. And I said, they're very busy, and the Chinese know this with making sure that the resources and the diplomatic relations along the South China Sea and what's called the uh, the line of demarc Chinese are not being taken advantage of. That is nothing more than a distraction for the Navy Seventh Fleet and our allies. The Chinese are building this maritime road and have been for some time. That's the main effort. It's, having leveraged bond positions over some of these foreign entities. Much of what your last question was in terms of where the alternative supply chain is going to take place. Those are slowly eroding and dissipating, not to use a term that I've used already, but in a form of dissipative warfare. The Chinese know that economically they can really capitalize on the disadvantaged countries, and that's what the One Belt, One Road is for. It's an economic colonization of nations. Their end state, and I'll answer the question a little bit more precisely, Bob, is to colonize the United Kingdom for what happened in Hong Kong, the 100-year lease. So, because Chinese saw the stationing of British military on their land as an unforgivable sin. Certainly, the Boxer Rebellion has its examples, but the British own part of China, which is unforgivable. So, really, the thing for what we should be watching out for is how are the Chinese developing advanced forms of warfare, not just from a military perspective, but near and dear to your heart, from an intelligence perspective, the economic and the diplomatic. We use the dime mnemonic, and that's what I use during OODA to really understand how that mets itself out, is keeping an eye on what the Chinese are already doing and understand that concretely.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, that's a lot to think about, and I really appreciate this. Very insightful. We'll be linking to all of your books and your website, and really am thankful that you did this.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you again for the opportunity, sir.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.